The baby was dying in the cradle, and the widower stood in the doorway doing nothing, just watching. Like death was an old friend he'd been expecting. Then this fat Irish woman nobody wanted shoved past him, snatched up that burning child, and said the words that cracked his frozen heart wide open. "No one wants a fat girl, sir, but I can nurse the baby." He should have thrown her out. Instead, he heard himself whisper, "Then stay." And everything changed. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button right now. Follow Maggie's story to the very end, and drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far her journey travels across this world. Now, let's go. The stagecoach driver didn't wait. Maggie Doyle hit the Wyoming dirt hard, her bag following a second later. Dust exploded around her boots, men's boots too big stuffed with newspaper, and she grabbed the fence post to steady herself. "God keep you, miss," the driver called, already snapping the reins. "He hasn't yet," Maggie muttered, watching the coach disappear into September heat waves. Silence swallowed her whole. The Bellamy Ranch sprawled like a graveyard house, dark barn doors hanging crooked chickens scattered and mean-looking. No smoke from the chimney, no movement in the windows, just prairie wind and the smell of things rotting. Maggie picked up her bag and walked toward the porch. Her thighs screamed from 3 days on that coach. Her back felt like someone had taken a hammer to her spine. And her stomach, Christ, her stomach had given up asking for food somewhere around the Nebraska border. She'd eaten her last piece of bread at dawn, and the telegram from Mrs. Sarah Bellamy's sister hadn't mentioned anything about meals. Just cook needed. Motherless household. Immediate. Wages negotiable. Negotiable meant desperate. Desperate meant they'd take anyone. Even her. The porch steps groaned when she climbed them. That sound used to make her want to disappear. Used to make her want to apologize for existing, for taking up space, for being the kind of woman men looked past and women looked down on. But she'd buried that shame somewhere between Boston and here, packed it down like dirt on a coffin. She raised her fist to knock. Then she heard it. A baby. Screaming. Not fussing screaming. The kind of sound that meant pain, meant fever, meant something dying in the dark. Maggie's hand dropped to the doorknob. Locked. "Mr. Bellamy," she called. Nothing. "Mr. Bellamy, I'm Maggie Doyle, your cook. Let me in." The screaming got worse. Damn it. She stepped back and kicked the door. Once. Twice. The lock gave with a crack that echoed across the empty yard, and she was inside. The smell hit like a fist. Sour milk-soiled linen sickness baked into the walls. Curtains blocked every window. Dust covered everything like snow. And that baby god, that baby was dying somewhere in this tomb. Maggie dropped her bag and ran. Down the hallway, past a parlor full of sheet-covered furniture, following the sound of suffering. A bedroom door stood half open. She shoved through. The cradle rocked in the corner, moved by tiny thrashing fists. Maggie fell to her knees beside it. The baby boy was maybe 4 months old, face red as a coal body, rigid with fever. His diaper had soaked through hours ago. The blanket beneath him was drenched with sweat, and worse. His eyes rolled unseeing, and foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Maggie whispered. She yanked him from the cradle. He was burning, actual burning, like touching a stove. His little body convulsed against her chest, and she wrapped both arms around him, holding him steady. "Shh," she breathed into his wet hair. I've got you now." She ran back to the kitchen, the baby clutched tight. The stove was cold. The pump handle stuck. She wrenched it until water coughed out brown, then clear. Come on." She filled the basin with one hand, baby screaming in the other. Found a rag on the counter, filthy, but it would do. Dunked it. Wrung it. Pressed it to the baby's forehead. He shrieked louder. "I know," Maggie said, her voice cracking. "I know it hurts, little one, but you've got to let me help you." She stripped off his soaked diaper, his tiny gown. sponged his arms, his legs, his chest. The water in the basin turned pink with heat. She dumped it, filled it again, kept working. Her hands never stopped moving. And she sang. An old Gaelic lullaby her mother used to hum while scrubbing other people's floors. Maggie didn't remember the words. Just the melody, just the rhythm that matched a heartbeat, matched breathing, matched the sound of staying alive when everything told you to quit. The baby's screams turned to whimpers. His body started to relax. Maggie dipped the rag again, squeezed cool water over his burning skin, and kept singing. That's when she felt it. Eyes on her back. She turned slowly. A man stood in the kitchen doorway, tall, gaunt, wearing clothes that used to fit someone who gave a damn. Dark hair falling into darker eyes, eyes that looked like they'd already seen the end of the world and were just waiting for it to catch up. James Bellamy. He stared at her. At this fat, plain Irish nobody in his kitchen holding his dying son. His jaw worked. His hands hung at his sides like broken tools. Maggie met his stare head on. "When did the fever start?" she demanded. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. "When did the fever start?" "Yesterday." His voice sounded like rust. "Morning." "Has he kept milk down?" "No." "Medicine?" "Tried. He won't take anything." "Where's the doctor?" "Town's 40 miles. By the time I got there and back." He stopped, swallowed. He'd be dead. Maggie looked down at the baby, then back at the father. This was the moment. The moment when men saw her, really saw her, and decided she wouldn't do. Too big, too plain, too much. She didn't give him the chance to choose. "No one wants a fat girl, sir," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "I know that. I've known it my whole life. People see me and think lazy, dirty, desperate. They think I'll take any job, any scraps, any life they throw at me because I'm grateful someone's looking at me at all." James flinched. "But here's what I am," Maggie continued. "I'm a woman who's delivered 6 babies when midwives didn't show. I'm a woman who's nursed infants through cholera, through fever, through starvation. I'm a woman who knows how to make medicine from roots and bark when there's no doctor for 100 miles. And I'm a woman who doesn't quit when things get hard." She stood up, the baby still in her arms. "So, I'm going to ask you one question, Mr. Bellamy, and you're going to answer me true. Do you want this baby to live?" James stared at her. Something moved behind his dead eyes, something that might have been hope if hope hadn't already died 3 months ago with his wife. "Yes," he whispered. "Then stay out of my way." She brushed past him. "I need every clean cloth in this house. I need dried herbs, fever, few willow bark yarrow, anything bitter. I need a clean diaper. And I need you to tell me right now if you've got a wet nurse in town or if I'm feeding this baby myself." James stood frozen. "Now, Mr. Bellamy?" He jerked like she'd slapped him. Then he moved up the stairs, doors slamming open, drawers scraping. Maggie heard him tearing through rooms like a man searching for ammunition. She laid the baby on the kitchen table. He'd stopped screaming, but his breathing came too fast, too shallow. His little chest heaved with every breath. "You're going to fight," she told him. "You hear me? Your daw's given up, but you haven't. Not yet." James returned with an armload of linens, some clean, some questionable. He dropped them on the table. "The wet nurse left. After my wife died, she said the baby reminded her too much of death. Then I'll feed him." "You can't. I've done it before. I'll do it again." Maggie grabbed a cloth and started tearing it into strips. "Now the herbs. Do you have them or not?" "Pantry. Top shelf. My wife used to—" His voice broke. "She used to make tea." "Good. Get them." He disappeared into the pantry. Maggie worked fast, changing the baby's diaper, wrapping him in clean linen, checking his breathing. His fever was still too high, but not as high. The cool water had helped. James returned with a small wooden box. Inside, dried leaves, roots, bark. Maggie sorted through them with practiced hands. This and this. You got a pot? Yes. Fill it. Put it on the stove. Get the fire going. I can't. I don't. You can. You will. Move. James moved. For the next hour, Maggie commanded that kitchen like a general. She brewed tea from willow bark, let it cool, dripped it between the baby's lips with a rag. She mixed feverfew into a paste, rubbed it on his chest. She kept him wrapped loose, kept his skin cool, kept singing that old song her mother taught her. James did what she told him, fetching water, stoking the fire, holding the baby when she needed both hands. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just obeyed like a soldier who'd forgotten how to think for himself. The sun went down. Darkness filled the windows. The baby's fever dropped. Not gone, but lower. Manageable. His breathing evened out. His little fists unclenched. Maggie finally allowed herself to breathe. She looked up. James stood across the table, his hands gripping the edge like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His eyes were on his son. He's through the worst, Maggie said quietly. Fever might spike again in the night. I'll need to watch him. You saved him. James's voice cracked. You walked into my house and you saved my son. I did my job. No. He looked at her, really looked at her. Not past her, not through her, but at her. You did more than that. Maggie felt heat rise in her cheeks, not fever, but something worse, something dangerous. She turned away, busying herself with the basin. You should eat. When's the last time you had a proper meal? I don't. That wasn't a question. She moved to the pantry, found potatoes gone soft, salt pork, turning flour still good. Sit down. Miss Doyle. Sit. Down. He sat. Maggie cooked. Her hands knew the work, peeling, chopping, frying. The kitchen filled with the smell of food. Real food, the kind that reminded you that being alive meant something. She set a plate in front of James. He stared at it like he'd forgotten what eating was for. Eat, she said. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. He picked up his fork, put food in his mouth, chewed mechanically, swallowed without tasting. Maggie fixed herself a plate and sat across from him. The chair groaned under her weight, that familiar sound, that announcement of her presence. James didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't look away. They ate in silence. Finally, James set down his fork. My wife's name was Sarah. She died 3 months ago. Bled out after the birth. The doctor said, he said there was nothing anyone could have done. But He stopped. Started again. I should have gotten her to town sooner. Should have insisted on a better doctor. Should have doesn't bring people back, Maggie said. Believe me, I know. James looked at her. Who did you lose? My sister, my mother, my father before I was old enough to remember his face. She pushed potatoes around her plate. Loss doesn't make you special, Mr. Bellamy. It just makes you human. Then why do I feel like I'm the only one drowning? Because grief's a lonely thing. Makes you think you're the first person to ever hurt this bad. She met his eyes. But you're not. And that baby upstairs, he's hurting too. He lost his mother same as you lost your wife. Difference is, he's too little to understand why the person who's supposed to love him most has stopped showing up. James's face went white. I haven't stopped. Haven't you? Maggie's voice stayed gentle, but her words cut clean. When's the last time you held him, sang to him, looked at him, and saw something besides your wife's ghost? James stood abruptly. His chair scraped across the floor. You don't know anything about... I know your son almost died today because you gave up. Maggie stood too. I know that fever's been building for 2 days, and you didn't do a damn thing to stop it. I know there's food rotting in your pantry and dust on every surface, and that baby's been crying himself sick while you, what? Prayed for death to take him too, so you wouldn't have to feel anymore. Get out. James's voice shook. Get out of my house. No. I said, I heard what you said, and I'm saying no. Maggie crossed her arms. You asked me if I wanted this job. You said then stay. Well, I'm staying. And if you want me gone, you're going to have to throw me out yourself. They stood there, two broken people in a broken house, staring each other down. Then James's face crumpled. He sank back into his chair and put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. No sound came out, just silent, shuddering sobs that looked like they'd been locked up for months. Maggie waited. After a long time, James spoke into his hands. I can't do this. I can't be what he needs. Yes, you can. You don't understand. I understand plenty. Maggie pulled her chair closer and sat back down. I understand you're scared. I understand you think if you love him too much, losing him will kill you. I understand you're trying to protect yourself by not showing up. James looked up. His eyes were red raw. How do you know that? Because I've done it too. Maggie's voice went soft. After my sister died, I stopped letting people close. Figured if I didn't love anyone, I couldn't lose anyone. Worked great. I was safe, protected, alone. She paused. I was also dying. Just slower. What changed? Nothing. I'm still dying slow, still keeping people at arm's length, still the fat girl nobody wants. She shrugged. But every now and then someone needs me, really needs me, and I show up anyway. Because showing up even when you're scared, even when it hurts, that's the only thing that makes us human instead of ghosts. James wiped his face with his sleeve. I don't know how to be his father without her. Then learn, same way he's learning to live without his mother. Maggie reached across the table. After a moment, James took her hand. Her fingers were thick, work-worn, scarred. His were thin, trembling, desperate. Teach me, he whispered. All right, Maggie said. First lesson starts now. Come on. She stood, pulling him up with her. They walked to where the baby slept in his cradle, breathing steady, now fever down, tiny fists curled against his chest. Pick him up, Maggie said. He's sleeping. Pick him up. James bent down. His hands shook as he slid them under his son's small body. The baby stirred, made a small sound of protest, then settled against his father's chest. Now what? James whispered. Now you hold him. That's it. Just hold him and remember he's alive. Remember you're alive. Remember that surviving isn't the same as living, but it's a start. They stood there in the dark kitchen, a broken father, a dying baby, and a fat Irish cook nobody wanted. And for the first time in 3 months, James Bellamy cried real tears instead of dust. Maggie woke to the sound of a rooster that needed killing and sunlight burning through her window. She bolted upright. The baby. She was out of bed and running before her brain caught up her bare feet, slapping the cold floor. Her nightgown tangling around her legs. She hit the kitchen at full speed. James stood at the stove. The baby sat in a basket on the table wrapped in clean blankets, eyes open and alert. And James was cooking. You're awake, he said without turning around. Good. I wasn't sure how you took your coffee. Maggie stopped in the doorway, breathing hard. What are you doing? Making breakfast, or trying to. He gestured at the pan with a fork. These eggs are fighting back. You're cooking. You cooked last night. Seemed fair. He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something almost human in his face. Besides, Thomas woke up hungry. I fed him like you showed me. Changed him. He's been quiet for 20 minutes. Maggie moved to this table and checked the baby. His forehead was cool. His color was good. His eyes tracked her movements with interest instead of pain. His fever broke completely, she breathed. Around 3 in the morning. I checked him every hour like you said. James scraped eggs onto 2 plates. They looked terrible, burned on one side, runny on the other, but they were food, and he'd made them. Sit. Eat. Then you can tell me what needs doing today. Maggie sat. The chair groaned. James didn't react. He set a plate in front of her, then sat across from her with his own. They ate bad eggs in comfortable silence, while Thomas made small baby sounds from his basket. The ranch hands will be coming in for breakfast soon, James said eventually. They're used to fending for themselves, but with you here... He paused. They're going to talk. About you. About your size. Let them talk. I won't have them disrespecting Mr. Bellamy. Maggie set down her fork. Men have been talking about my size since I was 12 years old, and my body decided to grow out instead of up. I've heard every joke, every insult, every comment made just loud enough for me to hear. And I'm still here. I'm still standing. So unless your ranch hands plan to do something worse than talk, I can handle it. Still, you're under my roof now. That makes you my responsibility. I'm nobody's responsibility but my own. James looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes traced her broad shoulders, her thick arms, her face that would never be called beautiful by anyone's measure. And then he said, You're wrong about one thing. What's that? People do want you. He stood and carried his plate to the basin. Thomas wants you. I want you. This house wants you. You're the first thing in 3 months that's felt like hope. He walked out before she could respond. Maggie sat alone in the kitchen, her half-eaten eggs going cold, her heart doing something dangerous in her chest. Don't, she told herself. Don't you dare hope. Because hope was a luxury for pretty girls. Thin girls who got chosen instead of settled for. Hope was the thing that got women like her destroyed. But Thomas made a small sound from his basket, and when she looked at him, he smiled a real smile, gummy and perfect. And despite everything she knew, despite every lesson she'd learned about staying small and safe and expecting nothing, Maggie smiled back. Outside, boots hit the porch. Voices rose in rough laughter. The door swung open, and 3 men walked in. Ranch hands dusty and hungry, and looking for breakfast. They stopped when they saw Maggie. The tallest one, with a scar cutting through his beard, looked her up and down. Well, looks like Bellamy finally found himself a cook. His tone said everything his words didn't. Maggie stood. She was taller than she looked, sitting down 5'8" in her bare feet, broad as a man across the shoulders. She met Scar's eyes dead on. Maggie Doyle, she said. I'll have breakfast ready in 20 minutes. You can wait outside, or you can wait in here. But either way, you'll wait quiet. The second man, younger with mean eyes, snickered. Guess we know why she's got that attitude. Probably chases off anyone who... Enough. James appeared in the doorway behind them. His voice cracked like a whip. Miss Doyle is the cook, the nurse, and the only reason my son's alive today. You'll treat her with respect, or you'll find work elsewhere. Am I clear? Silence. I said, am I clear? Yes, sir, Scar muttered. The others nodded. Good, now get out. Breakfast'll be ready when it's ready. The men filed back outside. James caught Maggie's eye, nodded once, and followed them. Maggie stood alone in the kitchen, her heart pounding, something fierce and dangerous burning in her chest. She'd been defended before. By madams who needed her cooking, by foremen who couldn't afford to lose her work. But she'd never been defended by a man who'd lost everything and was just starting to remember what fighting for something looked like. She turned to Thomas. Your da's broken, little one. But maybe, just maybe broken, things can still be sharp enough to protect what matters. Thomas gurgled. Maggie laughed, a real laugh surprised out of her. Then she got to work. Because that's what women like her did. They showed up. They stayed. They worked. And sometimes, just sometimes, they let themselves believe that staying might be enough. The ranch hands ate in silence that first morning, forks scraping plates, eyes cutting to Maggie, and then away like they'd seen something shameful. She served them fried potatoes and salt pork biscuits that came out heavier than she'd wanted, but were still better than anything they'd eaten in months. Nobody said thank you. Nobody met her eyes except Scar, whose name turned out to be Dutch, and his stare felt like hands she didn't want on her. James ate at the head of the table, Thomas in a basket beside him. He didn't look at his men, didn't join their silence or break it. Just ate methodically, the way a man eats when food stopped meaning anything except fuel. When the hands finished, they scraped back their chairs and headed for the door. The young one with mean eyes called Riley paused beside Maggie at the stove. "Biscuits were heavy," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess that's what happens when the cook's built like a—" "Riley!" James stood. "Get out. I was just saying, out, now. And if I hear you speak to Miss Doyle like that again, you can collect your pay and ride." Riley's face went red, but he left. The others followed, boots heavy on the porch, voices dropping to mutters once they were outside. Maggie kept scrubbing the pan she was holding, her hands moving in steady circles even though the pan was already clean. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did." James picked up Thomas, the baby, settling naturally against his shoulder now, like he was remembering what a father's arms felt like. "They work for me. That means they follow my rules. And my rules say you get treated decent." "Decent?" Maggie let the word sit between them. "That's a low bar, Mr. Bellamy." "Maybe, but it's higher than most women in your position get." He wasn't wrong. Maggie had worked in houses where the men thought hired help meant hired in every way that mattered. She'd learned to carry a knife in her apron, learned which rooms to avoid after dark, learned that fighting back usually meant losing your job, and sometimes worse. "I appreciate it," she said finally. "The defending, but I can handle men like Riley." "I know you can. Doesn't mean you should have to." He carried Thomas upstairs, leaving Maggie alone with dirty dishes and something warm and dangerous growing in her chest. The days found their rhythm after that. Maggie woke before dawn, started the stove, made coffee strong enough to strip paint. She cooked breakfast for 5 men who ate like they were racing death, and 1 man who ate like death had already won. She cleaned a house that fought her at every turn, years of grief and dust and things left undone, because doing them meant admitting Sarah was never coming back to do them herself. Thomas thrived. His fever stayed gone. His appetite came back fierce and demanding. Maggie nursed him when he needed it. Her body remembering how, even though she'd never had a child of her own, had only ever been the woman who helped when real mothers couldn't. She sang to him in Gaelic, changed him, bathed him, carried him on her hip while she worked because he cried less when he could see her. And James was trying. He held Thomas every morning after breakfast, rocking him in the chair by the window until the baby fell asleep. He read to him from the Bible, even though Thomas was too young to understand anything except the rumble of his father's voice. He changed diapers badly, mixed formula worse, but he kept trying, kept showing up, kept learning how to be a father to a son he'd almost let slip away. But he still didn't speak much. Didn't ask questions or make conversation or fill the silence with anything except his presence. And Maggie. Maggie was used to silence, had lived in it her whole life. But this silence felt different. It felt like a man holding his breath underwater, waiting to see if he'd drown or surface. On the 4th day, she baked bread. Real bread, not the quick biscuits she'd been making. She spent the morning kneading dough, her thick arms working the rhythm her mother had taught her, folding in raisins she'd found in the pantry, adding cinnamon and a touch of honey. The house filled with the smell of it, yeast and sweetness, and something that felt like home, even in a place that wasn't hers. She pulled the loaves from the oven just as the sun started its descent. Golden perfect, still steaming when she set them on the counter to cool. James came in from checking the horses, dusty and tired, and stopped in the doorway. "What's that smell?" "Raisin bread. Thought you might like something besides salt pork and potatoes." He moved closer, staring at the loaves like they were something holy. Sarah used to make raisin bread. Every Sunday, He stopped, his throat working. I haven't had it since she died. Maggie's hands stilled on the towel she was holding. I'm sorry. I didn't know. No. James looked at her. No, it's good. Smells like things used to smell. Before. He left without taking any, and Maggie stood there feeling like she'd done something wrong even though she didn't know what. That night she cut a thick slice, wrapped it in a clean cloth, and left it on the porch outside James's bedroom door. No note, no explanation, just bread and the hope that sometimes the things that hurt were also the things that healed. By morning, it was gone. The next evening she left another slice. Gone by dawn. On the third evening, she left a whole small loaf. The fourth morning, she found a note beside her coffee cup, written in careful script. Thank you. Maggie pressed the note flat against the table with her palm and allowed herself to smile. The weather turned the second week. Rain moved in from the west, cold and relentless, turning the yard to mud and the sky to iron. The hands grumbled through breakfast, complained about work that couldn't be done in the wet, then disappeared into the barn to mend tack and sharpen tools and stay dry. Maggie had laundry that needed hanging and chickens that needed feeding, rain or not. She wrapped Thomas in an oilcloth sling against her chest, pulled her shawl over both their heads, and stepped out into the downpour. The chickens scattered when she approached, stupid and panicked the way chickens always were. She scattered feed with one hand, holding Thomas steady with the other, her boots sinking into mud that sucked at her heels with every step. Rain soaked through her shawl, plastered her hair to her face, ran in cold rivers down her back. Thomas started to cry. I know, love, Maggie said, trying to keep the rain off his face. I know it's miserable. Just a few more minutes. She finished with the chickens and turned back toward the house. That's when her boot caught in the mud. She stumbled, caught herself on the fence post, but not before her other foot slipped out from under her. She landed hard on her backside mud, splashing up around her, soaking through her skirts. Thomas wailed against her chest, shocked but unhurt. Damn it, Maggie muttered. She tried to stand, but her skirts were tangled around her legs, and her boots had no purchase in the slick mud. She got one knee under her, then the other, but between the weight of her soaked clothes and the baby strapped to her chest and the mud pulling her down, she couldn't get upright. Need help? Maggie looked up. James stood on the porch, rain running off the brim of his hat. He wasn't smiling, but something in his face had softened. I'm fine, Maggie said, even as she struggled to get her feet under her. You're sitting in the mud with my son strapped to your chest in a rainstorm. You're not fine. I can manage. James was already moving, crossing the yard in long strides, his boots handling the mud better than hers. He reached her and held out his hand. Maggie stared at it. Men didn't offer her hands. Men didn't help women like her up when they fell. They looked away embarrassed, or they laughed, or they made jokes about earthquakes and avalanches and things too heavy to lift. Miss Doyle, James said. Take my hand. She took it. His grip was solid, steady. He braced himself and pulled, and Maggie came up out of the mud with a sound like the earth letting go. She stood there dripping, covered in filth. Thomas crying against her chest, and James still holding her hand. You all right? He asked. Fine. Just clumsy. Mud slick. Could have happened to anyone. He let go of her hand and reached for Thomas, carefully unwrapping the oilcloth. Let's get him inside. Get you both dry. They hurried through the rain, Maggie's sodden skirts slapping against her legs. In the kitchen, James took Thomas, while Maggie stripped off her shawl and her outer layer of skirts. She stood there in her underclothes, soaked, muddy, shivering, and tried not to think about what she must look like. James had his back to her, soothing Thomas, giving her privacy, without making it obvious. There's a robe in the washroom, Sarah's. You can use it while your things dry. I don't want to use it. That's an order. Maggie found the robe. It was too small across the shoulders, too short in the arms, but it was dry and warm, and smelled faintly of lavender. She wrapped it around herself and returned to the kitchen. James had Thomas settled in his basket, wrapped in a blanket, already calming down. He'd started a kettle for tea. "Sit," he said. "You're shaking." "I'm fine." "Sit down, Miss Doyle. Please." She sat. James poured tea when it was ready, set a cup in front of her, and took the chair across from her. They sat in silence while rain hammered the roof and Thomas made small, contented sounds from his basket. "You didn't have to go out in that," James said finally. "The chickens could have waited. They needed feeding. They're chickens. They'll survive missing a meal. So will people, but that doesn't mean we should let them starve." Maggie wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Besides, I've worked in worse weather. This is nothing." "You've worked in everything, haven't you?" James studied her over his own cup. "Never stopped. Never quit. Never asked for help, even when you needed it." "Help doesn't come to women like me, Mr. Bellamy. We learned that early." "Women like you." "Fat women. Plain women. Women who don't fit what men want women to be." James set down his cup. "You think that's what I see when I look at you?" Maggie's heart lurched. "I think you see what everyone sees, and that's fine. I stopped caring a long time ago what people thought about how I look." "That's a lie." The words hit like a slap. Maggie's head snapped up. James met her eyes unflinching. "You care. You care every time Riley makes a comment. You care every time Dutch looks at you like you're something he's allowed to judge. You care every time you walk into a room and know people are thinking about your size instead of seeing you. You don't know. I know because I see it. The way you hold yourself sometimes like you're trying to take up less space. The way you apologize when you shouldn't. The way you work twice as hard as anyone else just to prove you deserve to be here." He leaned forward. "I know because I did the same thing after Sarah died. Tried to make myself small enough that grief couldn't find me. Worked too. Until you showed up and forced me to take up space again." Maggie couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except sit there while this broken man saw straight through every wall she'd built. "I don't see a fat woman when I look at you," James continued, his voice low and rough. "I see the woman who saved my son. I see the woman who sings to him in a language I don't understand. I see the woman who makes bread like my wife used to, not because she's trying to replace her, but because she knows sometimes the things that hurt are also the things that heal." Maggie's throat closed. Tears burned behind her eyes. Stupid, dangerous tears she hadn't let herself cry in years. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't." "Don't what?" "Don't tell you you matter. Don't tell you you're the first thing in 3 months that's made this house feel like something besides a tomb. Don't make me hope." The words broke out of her like something bleeding. "Don't make me think that maybe this time it'll be different, that maybe someone will see me and want me for more than just what I can do. Because I've hoped before, Mr. Bellamy, and hope is what destroys women like me." James reached across the table. He didn't touch her, just laid his hand palm up between them and offering a choice. "I can't promise I won't hurt you," he said. "I'm too broken for promises. But I can promise I see you, really see you. And what I see is worth more than your size, more than your face, more than any of the shallow things people judge women by." Maggie looked at his hand, looked at his face, saw the truth there, raw and painful and real. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. I need to check on the laundry." She fled to the washroom, closed the door, and pressed her back against it. Her chest heaved, her hands shook. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Maggie Doyle let herself cry, not from pain, not from shame, but from something infinitely more dangerous. From being seen. The next morning, Maggie woke to find something on her doorstep. A pair of women's boots. Good leather, well-made, sturdy enough for mud and rain, and the kind of work women like her did, They were worn but cared for, the leather oiled, the laces new. Beside them, a note in James's careful script. They were my sisters. She never came back. I think they'd rather stay here. Maggie picked up the boots with shaking hands. They were exactly her size, not too small, not pinching, not made for feet that danced instead of worked. They fit her like they'd been waiting. She put them on and walked taller. At breakfast, James said nothing about the boots. Neither did she. But when she served him his coffee, their eyes met, and something passed between them that didn't need words. The hands noticed, though. Riley stared at her feet, his mouth twisting into something ugly. "Nice boots," he said. "Bellamy giving out charity now." "Riley," Dutch warned. "What I'm just saying must be nice to get special treatment. Rest of us work for our pay, but I guess some people got other ways of earning." James stood so fast his chair toppled backward. "Out," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Pack your things. You're done here." Riley's face went white. "Boss, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did, and I'm done listening to it. You've got 1 hour. After that, if you're still on my property, I'll remove you myself." "You're firing me over this fat—" James crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and grabbed Riley by the front of his shirt, slamming him against the wall hard enough to rattle dishes. "Say one more word about her," James said, his face inches from Riley's. "One more word and you'll find out exactly how broken I still am." Riley's eyes went wide. He nodded frantically. James released him, and Riley scrambled for the door, nearly falling in his hurry to escape. The kitchen fell silent. Dutch, on the other hand, Pete, quiet and older, stared at their plates. Thomas gurgled from his basket, oblivious. James righted his chair and sat back down. His hands shook slightly as he picked up his fork. "Anyone else got comments about Miss Doyle?" he asked, his voice conversational now, which somehow made it worse. "No, sir," Dutch said quickly. Pete shook his head. "Good. Then eat your breakfast and get to work." They ate fast and left faster. Maggie stood at the stove, her heart hammering, her new boots solid on the floor beneath her. James finished his coffee and carried his plate to the basin. He paused beside her. "I meant what I said yesterday," he told her quietly. "You matter here, and anyone who can't see that doesn't belong on my land." He left before she could respond, and Maggie stood alone in the kitchen, holding a spatula, wearing boots that fit, and feeling something crack open in her chest that had been sealed shut for so long she'd forgotten it was there. That afternoon, while Thomas napped and the house settled into quiet, Maggie found herself in Sarah's room. She hadn't meant to go in there. Had avoided it deliberately, in fact, sensing that this was James's private grief, his sacred space of loss. But she'd been dusting the hallway, and the door had been open, and curiosity, or maybe something stronger than curiosity, had pulled her inside. The room was frozen in time. Dresses hung in the wardrobe, hairbrush on the dresser, still holding strands of pale blonde hair. A book lay open on the bedside table. Pages yellowed, waiting for someone to finish the chapter. Maggie moved through the space like a trespasser, barely breathing. On the dresser, she found a photograph in a silver frame. Sarah Bellamy had been beautiful, the kind of beautiful that made men write poetry and women feel inadequate. Delicate features, tiny waist, the kind of fragile loveliness that seemed like it might blow away in a strong wind. Beside the photograph, a journal. Maggie knew she shouldn't, knew this was crossing a line, but her hands moved before her mind could stop them, opening the journal to a random page. May 3rd, 1888. James tells me I'm beautiful, but I see the truth in the mirror. I'm getting bigger. My dresses barely fit. If I don't fix this, he'll stop loving me. He'll see me the way I see myself, disgusting, unworthy, too much. Maggie's stomach turned. She flipped to another page. June 12th. I ate nothing but broth today. James noticed and insisted I have dinner. I lied and said I was unwell. Better to be sick than fat. Better to disappear than be too much. Another page. August 4th. The doctor says the baby needs nutrition, but I can't. I can't let myself grow any larger. James deserves a wife he can be proud of, not a wife who takes up too much space. I'll eat after the baby comes. I'll fix myself then. I'll be perfect for him. I promise." Maggie closed the journal with shaking hands. She'd known women like Sarah, had worked with them, lived beside them, watched them starve themselves down to nothing, trying to fit into shapes men claimed to want. She'd pitied them and resented them in equal measure, pitied their pain, resented that they chose slow death over acceptance. But reading Sarah's words, seeing the desperation in every line, Maggie felt something else entirely. She felt rage. Not at Sarah. At the world that had taught her love was something you earned by shrinking. At every man who'd praised thin women and mocked fat ones. At James, even though she knew it wasn't fair for not seeing his wife destroying herself right in front of him. "You shouldn't be in here." Maggie spun around. James stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "I'm sorry," Maggie said quickly. "I was dusting and I shouldn't have. I'll go." "Wait." James stepped into the room, his eyes going to the journal in Maggie's hands. "You read it." It wasn't a question. "I'm sorry," Maggie said again. "I had no right." "What did it say?" Maggie hesitated. "Then, it said she was starving herself, trying to be perfect for you." James closed his eyes. "I know." "You knew?" "I knew she wasn't eating, knew she was getting thinner, weaker. I told her she was beautiful every day. I begged her to eat. But she—" His voice cracked. "She couldn't hear me, couldn't believe me. By the time Thomas came, she was so weak her body it gave up." "That's not your fault," Maggie said. "Isn't it? I married her. I should have made her understand. You can't make someone believe they're worth loving." Maggie moved toward him, the journal still in her hands. "That's something they have to decide for themselves. You can say the words every day, but if they don't believe them, the words are just noise." James looked at her. "Do you believe them? When I tell you that you matter, here, do you believe me?" Maggie's throat tightened. "I'm trying to." "That's all I could have asked of her. That's all I can ask of you." James took the journal gently from her hands and set it back on the dresser. Sarah thought becoming smaller would make her worthy of love. But the truth is, she disappeared long before she died. And I let her. I was so afraid of pushing her that I didn't fight for her. Didn't grab her and shake her, and make her see that I loved her exactly as she was. He turned back to Maggie. "I won't make that mistake again," he said. "If I see you trying to disappear, I'll fight for you, even if you hate me for it." "Why?" Maggie's voice came out barely a whisper. "Why do you care what happens to me?" "Because you stayed. Because you show up every morning and take care of my son like he's yours. Because you make bread that smells like memory, and you wear boots that fit, and you don't apologize for taking up space." James's voice dropped lower. "Because when I look at you, I don't see someone I have to save. I see someone strong enough to save me." The air between them felt electric dangerous. Maggie should step back, should remember her place, should remember that men like James Bellamy didn't want women like her, not really, not for more than convenience. But then James reached out and touched her cheek, barely a touch, just his fingers grazing her skin, and Maggie forgot how to breathe. "You're wrong about yourself," he whispered. "You think no one wants you, but I—" Thomas's cry split the moment like an axe. James dropped his hand and stepped back, and whatever he'd been about to say disappeared into the space between them. "I should—" Maggie gestured vaguely toward the door. "He needs—" "Yeah, go ahead." She fled, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Behind her, James remained in his dead wife's room, standing beside her photograph, looking at the woman he'd lost, and the woman he was terrified of wanting. And Maggie went to comfort the baby because taking care of things was what she did, what she knew, what kept her safe from hoping for anything more. But her cheek still burned where James had touched her, and hope dangerous and unwanted had already started to grow. That night, Maggie couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, feeling James's touch like a brand on her cheek. The house creaked around her, settling into darkness, but her mind raced with questions she didn't want to ask, and answers she was terrified to hear. He'd almost said something. Almost said he wanted her. But almost didn't count. Almost was just another way of saying, not quite good enough. She rolled onto her side, pulling the thin blanket tighter, and forced her eyes closed. Tomorrow she'd be tired, and tired meant mistakes, and she couldn't afford mistakes. Not here. Not when she'd finally found a place that felt like it might let her stay. Sleep came eventually, thin and restless, full of dreams about falling and being caught and falling again. She woke to Thomas screaming. Not crying, screaming. The sound tore through the house like something dying, and Maggie was on her feet and running before her brain fully woke, her nightgown tangling around her legs as she burst into the hallway. James stumbled out of his room at the same moment, hair, wild eyes unfocused with sleep. They collided at Thomas's door, both reaching for the handle, and then they were inside together, both moving toward the cradle, where Thomas thrashed and burned. "No," James breathed. "No, not again." Maggie grabbed the baby, and heat slammed into her palms, worse than last time, worse than anything she'd felt before. "Get cold water," she snapped. "Every cloth we have. Move!" James stood frozen, staring at his son with eyes gone hollow and dead. "James!" Maggie's voice cracked like a whip. "I need you here, right now. Not wherever you just went. Here." He blinked, focused, nodded. Then he ran. Maggie carried Thomas to the kitchen, her mind already sorting through what she needed, what she had, what might work when medicine and prayer both failed. The baby's body seized in her arms, his tiny back arching, his eyes rolling back until only whites showed. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare leave. Don't you dare." James crashed back into the kitchen with an armful of linen's basin sloshing water across the floor. His hands shook so badly he could barely set it down. "What do I do?" His voice came out ragged. "Tell me what to do." "Start the fire. We need steam. And I need—" Maggie laid Thomas on the table, already stripping off his burning clothes. "I need mustard powder. You have any?" "I don't. Maybe. Find it. Check everywhere. Go." He went tearing through cupboards like a madman while Maggie worked. She bathed Thomas in a water that turned warm from his fever within seconds. Changed the water. Bathed him again. His screams turned to weak whimpers, and that was worse somehow. Screaming meant fighting. Whimpering meant giving up. "Found it." James shoved a tin at her. "Good. Mix it with water. Make a paste. Not too thick. What are you going to poultice?" "For his chest. It'll help him breathe." Her hands never stopped moving, sponging, cooling, working against death with nothing but water and desperation. "Is the fire going?" "Yes." "Put a pot on. Fill it. We need this room thick with steam." James obeyed without question, and Maggie felt a flash of gratitude that he'd learned to trust her hands, even when his mind was screaming that his son was dying. Because Thomas was dying. She could feel it in the way his body had stopped fighting the fever, in the shallow rattle of his breathing, in the gray color creeping into his lips. "Come on, little one," she murmured, rubbing the mustard paste across his tiny chest. "Come on. Your da needs you. I need you. You don't get to leave us yet. You hear me? You don't get to leave." Steam started to fill the kitchen. James appeared at her elbow with the pot, setting it close enough that moisture gathered in the air around them. "Is he?" James couldn't finish the question. "He's fighting." "Will he win?" Maggie looked up at this man she barely knew. This broken widower who'd buried one love and was about to bury another, and she couldn't lie to him. "I don't know." James made a sound like he'd been gutted. He pressed both hands flat on the table, his head dropping, his whole body shaking. "I can't lose him," he whispered. I can't. I already lost her. I can't lose him too. Then help me fight for him. James lifted his head. His eyes were red, wet, desperate. How? Hold him, skin to skin. Your body heat's more stable than his right now. It might help regulate his temperature. I can't. What if I hurt him? You won't. Take off your shirt. James stripped off his nightshirt with shaking hands. Maggie carefully lifted Thomas and placed him against his father's bare chest. The baby's small body looked impossibly fragile against James's ribs. Now what? James asked. Now you hold him. You talk to him. You tell him every reason he needs to stay. I don't know what to say. Then figure it out. Because words matter, James. They mattered to Sarah even when she couldn't believe them. They'll matter to your son. James wrapped his arms around Thomas, cradling the baby against his heart. His mouth open-closed. He looked at Maggie helplessly. I don't know how to. Yes, you do. Start talking. James looked down at his son. When he spoke, his voice cracked and broke, but the words came. Your name is Thomas James Bellamy. You're 4 months old. Your mother died bringing you into this world, and I've been so angry at you for that. So angry that you lived and she didn't. And I know that's not fair. I know you didn't choose that. But I couldn't. His voice broke completely. I couldn't look at you without seeing her. Without seeing everything I lost. Maggie's throat tightened, but she kept working, kept cooling. Thomas's forehead kept the steam going, kept her hands busy so they wouldn't shake. But Miss Doyle, Maggie, she made me see you. Really see you. Not as the thing that took your mother from me, but as my son. As this person who needs me. Who's fighting so hard to live even though I gave up on both of us. James's tears fell onto Thomas's burning skin. So you can't leave. You hear me? You can't leave because I just figured out how to be your father, and I need more time. I need to learn how to do this right. I need to show you that I can be the man your mother thought I was before grief turned me into something else. Thomas's breathing hitched. James held him tighter. Please, James whispered. Please don't go. Please give me a chance to love you the way you deserve. The way I should have been loving you all along. The kitchen filled with steam and silence and the sound of 3 people fighting death together. Hours passed. The sun rose somewhere beyond the windows, gray light filtering through curtains Maggie hadn't opened. She lost track of time, lost track of everything except the rhythm of cooling checking, watching Thomas's small chest rise and fall, each breath a victory and a prayer. James never let go, never stopped talking. He told Thomas about Sarah, about the ranch, about the horses and the land and the life that was waiting if Thomas would just hold on. His voice went hoarse, but he kept going, kept filling the silence with words like they could build a bridge between living and dying. Dutch and Pete showed up for breakfast, took one look at James holding his burning son, and left without a word. Maggie heard them talking quietly outside, heard Dutch say something about fetching the doctor, even though they all knew 40 miles was too far. The fever peaked just after noon. Thomas's body went rigid, his back arching, his mouth opening in a silent scream. James started to panic, started to beg, and Maggie grabbed his face with both hands. Look at me, she commanded. Look at me, James. He met her eyes, his own wild with terror. He's still breathing. That means he's still fighting, so we fight with him. You understand? We don't give up until he does. I'm scared. I know, so am I. But scared doesn't mean defeated. Now hold your son and keep talking. James held on, kept talking, kept breathing in rhythm with Thomas, like he could force life into the baby through sheer will. And slowly, impossibly, the fever began to break. Thomas's body relaxed. His breathing deepened. Color started to return to his lips, his cheeks, his tiny fingers that had been clutching his father's chest. Maggie pressed her hand to his forehead and nearly sobbed with relief. "It's breaking," she whispered. "James, it's breaking." James looked down at his son, at this small person who'd fought death twice now and won both times. His face crumpled and he bent over Thomas, pressing his forehead to the baby's, his shoulders shaking with sobs that had been locked inside him for months. Maggie stepped back, giving them space, her own tears running freely now. Thomas opened his eyes, looked up at his father, and smiled. James broke completely. He held his son and cried like the world was ending and beginning at the same time. And Maggie stood in the steaming kitchen and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, broken things could heal if you fought hard enough for them. Later, after Thomas had been fed and changed and tucked into clean blankets, after James had finally released him and stumbled upstairs to wash and dress, Maggie found herself alone in the kitchen, staring at the dishes piled in the basin and trying to remember what normal felt like. Her hands shook. Her body ached. She'd been awake for almost 24 hours, running on nothing but fear and determination, and now that the crisis had passed, exhaustion hit like a fist. She sank into a chair and put her head in her hands. That's how James found her. "You should sleep," he said quietly. "So should you." "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see—" He stopped, sat down across from her. "I see him dying. I see Sarah dying. I see everyone I love disappearing while I stand there doing nothing. You didn't do nothing. You held him. You talked to him. You fought for him." "You fought for him. I just stood there and broke." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" James's voice went harsh. "I hired you to save my son, and you did. Twice now. And what have I done except fall apart every time things get hard?" "You showed up." Maggie lifted her head and looked at him. "That's what you did. You showed up even when you were terrified, even when you thought you'd fail. That's not nothing, James. That's everything." He shook his head. "I don't deserve—" "Stop." Maggie's voice cut through his self-hatred like a blade. "Stop deciding what you deserve and start accepting what you have. You have a son who's alive. You have a ranch. You have—" She hesitated. "You have people who care whether you live or die. That's more than most people get." "Do I—" James looked at her. "Have people who care?" The question hung between them, sharp and dangerous. "Yes," Maggie said quietly. "You do." "And do you have people who care?" Maggie's throat tightened. "I have Thomas. I have this job. That's enough." "That's not what I asked." "It's all I'm going to answer." James reached across the table. Slowly giving her time to pull away, he took her hand. His fingers laced through hers, rough palm against rough palm, both of them marked by work and survival. "I didn't hire you," he said. "I need you to know that. I didn't hire a cook or a nurse or a convenience. I didn't hire someone to fill a gap Sarah left. I took a chance on a woman who kicked down my door and saved my son, and every day since that woman has saved me too." "James." "Let me finish, please." He tightened his grip on her hand. "I know I'm broken. I know I'm not what you deserve. I'm a widower with a baby and a failing ranch and grief so heavy I can barely stand up under it most days. But when I look at you, when I watch you work, when I hear you sing, when I see you holding Thomas like he's yours, I remember what wanting something feels like." Maggie tried to pull her hand back. "You don't mean that. You're grateful. You're scared. You're not thinking straight." "I'm thinking straighter than I have in months." James held on when she pulled. "And I'm terrified. Terrified that I'm reading this wrong. Terrified that you'll leave. Terrified that I'm about to destroy the one good thing in my life by admitting I want more than just your cooking and your care." "Don't." Maggie's voice broke. "Don't do this. Don't make me hope for something that can't. Why can't it? Because men like you don't want women like me. Not really. Not for more than convenience or desperation or whatever this is. You think you want me now because I saved your son, and I'm here, and you're lonely. But what happens when you're not lonely anymore? What happens when some pretty widow comes to town, or when you remember what your wife looked like and realize, I'm nothing like her? Good. The word came out fierce. I don't want you to be like her. I don't want another fragile woman who'll disappear trying to be perfect. I want... James stood abruptly, came around the table, pulled Maggie to her feet. I want a woman who kicks down doors, who fights death with her bare hands, who takes up space and doesn't apologize for it. I want you. He kissed her, not gently, not carefully, hard and desperate and clumsy like a man who'd forgotten how kissing worked and was trying to remember through sheer force of will. For one shocked heartbeat, Maggie froze. Then she kissed him back. Her hands came up to his face, holding him like something precious and breakable. And she poured every ounce of want and fear and desperate hope into that kiss. Poured in all the years of being looked past, being settled for being the woman men used but never wanted. Poured in the terror that this was temporary, that she'd wake up and find it had all been wishful thinking. James pulled back just enough to breathe. Tell me this is real. Tell me I'm not... It's real. Maggie's voice shook. God help us both, it's real. He kissed her again, softer this time, and Maggie let herself believe for just a moment that maybe she was allowed to want something more than survival. Then Thomas cried from his basket, and reality crashed back in. They broke apart, both breathing hard, both looking at each other like they'd just stepped off a cliff and weren't sure if they were flying or falling. I should... Maggie gestured toward the baby. Yeah, he needs... Right. They moved around each other carefully, not quite touching the air between them, electric and awkward, and full of everything they hadn't said. Maggie picked up Thomas, and he settled against her. Immediately his small body warm, but no longer burning. She rocked him gently, not looking at James, not trusting herself to look at him. We should talk about this, James said finally. Later. After we've both slept. After we can think straight. Will that change anything? I don't know. Maggie finally met his eyes. Ask me when I'm not exhausted and terrified and still feeling your mouth on mine. James's expression softened into something that might have been a smile if he'd remembered how they worked. Fair enough. He left the kitchen and Maggie stood there holding Thomas. Her heart racing, her mind spinning, her lips still tingling from a kiss that should never have happened. Thomas looked up at her with serious eyes, like he knew exactly what had just changed and was waiting to see what she'd do about it. Don't look at me like that, Maggie told him. I don't know what I'm doing either. She carried him to her room, laid him in the small cradle she'd moved there weeks ago, and watched him drift off to sleep. Then she lay down on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to sort through the tangled mess of emotions in her chest. James had kissed her, had said he wanted her, had looked at her like she mattered for more than just what she could do. And the terrifying thing, the thing that made her want to run, was that she believed him. Not because she was naive, not because she was desperate, but because she'd seen him break open, seen him fight for his son, seen him choose to show up even when showing up meant facing every fear he had. And a man who could do that, who could love that fiercely, once he remembered how maybe that man could mean it when he said he wanted a woman the world had taught him not to want. Maybe. Maggie closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under dreams full of kisses and falling and hands that held on instead of letting go. She woke to the smell of something burning. Maggie bolted upright, heart-hammering, and rushed to the kitchen. James stood at the stove waving a towel at smoke pouring from a pan. Thomas sat in his basket on the table watching his father with what looked like infant concern. "What are you doing?" Maggie demanded. James jumped, nearly dropping the pan. "Making dinner. Or trying to. I thought you could use the rest, so I..." He gestured helplessly at the smoking disaster. I made it worse. Despite everything. Despite the exhaustion and the fear and the kiss that had changed everything, Maggie laughed. Really laughed, deep and genuine, the kind of laugh that shook her whole body. James stared at her like she'd lost her mind. It's not that funny. You're burning water. I am not. He looked at the pan. Okay, maybe I am. But in my defense, cooking's harder than it looks. It's really not. Maggie moved to the stove, took the pan from him, dumped the contents, and started over. What were you trying to make? Stew. Sarah used to. He stopped. Sorry, I shouldn't. It's fine. She was your wife. You're allowed to remember her. James leaned against the counter watching Maggie work with an expression she couldn't quite read. She couldn't cook either. We survived on burned stew and overboiled vegetables for the first year of our marriage. But she'd get this look on her face when she messed something up, this fierce determination, like she was going to master cooking through sheer force of will. Did she? No, but I loved that she tried. He paused. I love that you don't have to try. You know what you're doing. You move through the world like you've got a place in it. I've had to fight for that place every day of my life. I know. And James moved closer. That's what makes you strong. Not that you never struggle. That you struggle and keep going anyway. Maggie's hands stilled on the knife she was holding. James, about what happened earlier. I meant it. Every word. I know. That's what scares me. Why? She set down the knife and turned to face him. Because I've spent my whole life learning not to want things I can't have. Learning not to hope for more than survival. And you're asking me to want something that feels impossible. To hope for something that'll destroy me if it doesn't work out. What if it does work out? That scares me even more. Maggie's voice dropped to a whisper. Because then I'll have something to lose. And losing things I love it's never gone well for me. James reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek and Maggie's breath caught. I can't promise I won't hurt you, he said. I can't promise this'll be easy or simple or anything like what you deserve. But I can promise I'll show up. I'll fight for this. For you. For us. There is no us. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Then let me try to make there be. James's thumb traced her cheekbone. Let me court you proper. Let me prove this isn't just gratitude or loneliness or whatever you think it is. And if I say no, then I'll respect that. I'll still be grateful you're here. I'll still need you for Thomas. But I won't push for more. Maggie looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. Saw the fear that matched her own, the hope that was just as fragile, the want that was real enough to hurt. 1 month, she heard herself say. You get 1 month to prove this is real. To prove you want me for more than just convenience. And if at the end of that month I think you're lying to yourself or to me, we go back to how things were. Agreed. James's face lit up with something that looked like joy, tentative and uncertain, but there. 1 month. I can work with that. And James? If you hurt me, if you make me believe this and then take it back, I will leave. I don't care how much Thomas needs me. I don't care how much you've come to depend on me. I will leave, and you will never find me again. Understood. They stood there inches apart, the kitchen warm with steam and smoke and possibility. Then Thomas cried and the spell broke, and they both moved to comfort him, their hands brushing as they reached for the baby, that small touch electric and full of promise. Outside, the sun set over Wyoming prairie, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. And inside, 3 people, who'd almost been destroyed by loss, began the terrifying work of learning how to hope again. The next morning, James was gone before Maggie woke. She found a note on the kitchen table. His handwriting rushed road to town. Back by evening. Dutch and Pete know to listen to you. Maggie crumpled the note in her fist, something cold settling in her stomach. He'd left. The morning after kissing her, after saying he wanted her, after promising to prove himself, he'd left without a word. "Fool," she muttered to herself, though she wasn't sure if she meant him or herself. "You knew better than to hope." Thomas fussed from his cradle, and she pushed aside the hurt to tend to him. This was what mattered. This small life that needed her. Not whatever foolishness had happened yesterday, with a man still half in love with his dead wife. She fed Thomas, changed him, sang to him in Gaelic, while she worked through the morning routine. Dutch and Pete came in for breakfast, ate quietly, thanked her with nods instead of words, and left. The house settled into its usual rhythm, but everything felt different now. Tainted. Like she'd been stupid enough to want something, and now had to live with the consequences of that wanting. By noon, she'd scrubbed every surface in the kitchen twice, and still felt restless, angry, hurt, in a way that made her want to break things. By evening, when the sun started its descent, and James still hadn't returned, that hurt had hardened into something sharper. She was kneading dough with more force than necessary when she heard hoofbeats in the yard. Maggie didn't look up, didn't stop working, just kept punishing the dough with her fists, like it was responsible for her stupidity. The door opened, closed. Footsteps crossed to the table. "Maggie." She didn't answer. Didn't trust her voice not to crack. "Maggie, look at me. Please." "Busy." "I brought you something." "Don't want it." James moved into her line of sight, and she saw he was holding something wrapped in brown paper. His hair was wind-blown, his face tired, and there was something in his eyes that looked like nervousness. "I'm sorry I left without telling you where I was going," he said. "I should have. I know how that must have looked. But I needed to." He stopped, took a breath. "Just open it, please." Maggie wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and took the package. It was heavier than she expected, soft. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was fabric. Cream-colored fine weave, the kind of material Maggie had never touched, let alone owned. She lifted it out, and it unfolded into a dress, simple but beautiful, with careful stitching and buttons that actually matched. Her throat closed. "It was Sarah's," James said quickly. "She ordered it from a catalog, said she'd wear it when she was thin enough. But she never—" He swallowed hard. "It's been in the attic for 2 years. I took it to the seamstress in town, Mrs. Chen. Asked her to alter it, to make it fit you." Maggie stared at the dress. At this piece of a dead woman's unfulfilled dreams, now remade for someone the dead woman never could have imagined. "I can't wear this," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because it's hers. Because she was killing herself trying to fit into it. And you want me to just put it on? Like that doesn't matter." "It matters." James's voice went rough. "It matters that she thought she needed to shrink to deserve beautiful things. It matters that I let her think that. But that dress has been waiting in the dark for 2 years, and I'm tired of beautiful things going to waste because someone decided they weren't worthy." He moved closer, and Maggie felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Sarah couldn't wear it because she'd convinced herself she wasn't small enough," James continued. "But you could wear it right now, exactly as you are. No shrinking required, no starving, no disappearing. Just you in a dress that should have been worn to something happy instead of sitting in an attic turning yellow. What if it doesn't fit? Mrs. Chen's good at what she does. She measured it against the dress you wear most often, said she'd stake her reputation it'll fit." James set the dress carefully on the table. "And even if it doesn't, even if I got it wrong, at least I tried. At least I showed up and tried to give you something beautiful instead of just taking what you give me every day." Maggie touched the fabric with trembling fingers. No one had ever given her a dress. Not new, not remade, not anything except hand-me-downs from thinner women that she'd had to piece together to make fit. "The Harvest Festival's in 3 weeks, James said. "Town puts it on every year. Dancing, food, everyone showing off their best. I haven't gone since Sarah died, but I'd like to go this year, with you, if you'll come." "As what, your cook? Your nurse?" "As the woman I'm courting." "Say." The words hung in the air between them, solid and real and terrifying. People will talk, Maggie said. Let them. They'll say terrible things about me, about you for wanting me. I don't care what they say. You will. When you're standing there with me and everyone's staring, wondering what's wrong with you, that you'd choose. James grabbed her shoulders, not hard but firm enough to make her look at him. Stop. Stop deciding what I'll feel. Stop deciding I'm too weak or too shallow or too whatever to handle people talking. I buried my wife. I almost lost my son twice. I've lived through worse than gossip. Have you lived through watching someone you thought cared about you realize they made a mistake? Have you watched their face change when they suddenly see what everyone else sees? No. James's grip gentled. But I've watched my own face in the mirror every morning knowing I was the mistake. Knowing I let Sarah die thinking she wasn't enough. So I'm done with mistakes. I'm done with letting people I care about think they're not worthy of being wanted, being chosen, being seen. Maggie's tears spilled over. She tried to turn away, but James held on. Go to the festival with me, he said. Wear the dress or don't. Dance with me or don't. But show up. Let me show the whole damn town that I choose you, that I'm choosing you every day. And if they don't like it, if they talk or whisper or judge, then they can go to hell. You're asking me to be brave. I'm asking you to let me be brave for you, for us. Maggie looked at the dress, at this symbol of everything she'd never thought she could have. Then she looked at James, at this broken man who was trying so hard to be whole. 3 weeks, she said. That gives you 3 weeks to change your mind. I won't. You might. I won't. James pulled her into his arms, and Maggie let herself be held. Let herself believe for just a moment that maybe this wasn't the beginning of heartbreak. But I'll prove it every day until you believe me. He held her while she cried, held her while the sun set. Outside the window, held her until Thomas woke hungry and broke the moment with his demanding cries. And Maggie picked up the dress, carried it to her room, and hung it where she could see it every morning, a reminder that she'd been stupid enough to hope and now had to live with whatever came next. The 3 weeks that followed were the strangest of Maggie's life. James courted her the way men courted in old stories, with small gestures and careful attention, and a patience that made her want to scream and believe in equal measure. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, left them in a jar on her windowsill, without comment. He took Thomas for hours at a time so she could rest, could have moments to herself, could remember what it felt like to exist without being needed. He asked her questions about her life before, about Ireland, about the things she liked and hated and dreamed about when she let herself dream. And he touched her. Not often, not presumptuously, but enough that she started to crave it. His hand brushing hers when they passed in the hallway. His shoulder bumping hers when they sat together after dinner. His fingers grazing her back when he reached past her for something in the kitchen. Small touches, deliberate touches. Touches that said, I see you. I want you. I'm here. It was torture. Because every touch made her hope more. Made her forget all the lessons she'd learned about staying safe, about expecting nothing, about protecting her heart from men who said one thing and meant another. And James kept showing up, kept proving himself, kept looking at her like she was something worth wanting instead of just something convenient. The town, when Maggie finally ventured there for supplies with Dutch driving the wagon, was less kind. She felt the stares the moment she climbed down from the wagon. Felt women's eyes tracking her body. Felt men's gazes sliding away in disgust, or lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. The general store went quiet when she entered conversations, stopping mid-sentence. Help you? The shopkeeper asked, his tone suggesting he'd rather not. I need flour, sugar, salt, and thread if you have it. He gathered the items without meeting her eyes, slapping them on the counter with unnecessary force. That'll be $3. Maggie handed over the money James had given her. The shopkeeper counted it twice, like he suspected her of cheating. You the new cook at Bellamy's place? I am. Heard his boy's been sick. Heard you been taking care of him." The shopkeeper's eyes finally met hers, and what she saw there made her stomach turn. "Heard other things too. About you and Bellamy. About what a woman like you might do to keep a position like that." Heat flooded Maggie's face. "James, Mr. Bellamy has been nothing but—" "Don't care what he's been. I'm just saying a man that recently widowed, he's vulnerable. Might make decisions he regrets later. Decisions involving women who, well, women who wouldn't normally catch his eye." Maggie grabbed her supplies with shaking hands. "Is that all?" "Just a word of warning, for your own good. Men like Bellamy, they don't marry women like you. Not permanent like, not in ways that matter." She left before she could say something that would make things worse. Dutch was waiting by the wagon, his face carefully neutral. "Don't listen to old Harrison," he said as he helped her up. "He's a bastard to everyone." "He's right though, isn't he?" Maggie's voice came out flat. "Men like James don't marry women like me." Dutch was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Boss told me once that his wife was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Said she looked like an angel, but he also said she disappeared a little more every day trying to be perfect until there wasn't enough of her left to save." He flicked the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. Maybe he learned something from that. Maybe he figured out beautiful isn't the same as alive. Maggie didn't answer. Couldn't answer around the lump in her throat. When they got back to the ranch, James was in the yard with Thomas, showing him the horses, even though the baby was too young to care. He looked up when the wagon approached his face, lighting up in a way that made Maggie's chest ache. "How was town?" he asked. "Fine." "Maggie." "I said it was fine." She climbed down from the wagon and grabbed her supplies. "I need to start dinner." She fled to the kitchen before he could ask more questions, before she could tell him what the shopkeeper had said, before she could watch his face change as he realized the man was right. That night after dinner, after Thomas was asleep, James found her in the kitchen washing dishes. "Talk to me," he said. "Nothing to talk about." "Something happened in town." "Nothing happened. I got supplies. We came back. That's all." James moved beside her, took the plate from her hands, set it in the basin. "Look at me." Maggie kept her eyes on the soapy water. "I need to finish." "Look. At me." She looked, and immediately wished she hadn't, because the concern in his eyes made her want to break. "What did someone say to you?" James asked quietly. "Nothing I haven't heard before." "That's not an answer." Maggie took a breath. Let it out slowly. "The shopkeeper, Harrison. He said men like you don't marry women like me. That you're vulnerable right now. That you'll regret whatever decisions you're making once you're thinking clearly again." James's jaw tightened. "That son of a—" "He's not wrong." "Yes, he is." "Is he?" Maggie turned to face James fully. "Because I've been thinking about it, and he's right. You are vulnerable. You did just lose your wife. And I am convenient. I'm here, I take care of your son. I make your life easier. But that's not love, James. That's just gratitude, with better packaging. You think I'm confusing gratitude with something else. I think you're a good man, who's trying to do the right thing. Who's trying to give me something nice because I helped you. But good intentions don't make a marriage, and they don't make me any less—" She gestured at herself. "Any less this." James stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked her completely. He laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Not mocking. Just tired and frustrated and almost fond. "You're so determined to believe I can't want you," he said. "So convinced that what I feel isn't real. And I get it. I do. You've spent your whole life being told you're not good enough, not pretty enough, not small enough. But Maggie—" He stepped closer. "I'm not those other men. I'm not looking at you and seeing a consolation prize or a convenient solution. I'm looking at you and seeing the woman who makes me want to be alive again." "James." "No, let me finish. You want to know what I see when I look at you. I see strength. I see someone who doesn't quit when things get hard. I see a woman who held my son through a fever that should have killed him and refused to let death win. I see someone who takes up space and doesn't apologize for it." His voice dropped. "And yeah, I see a woman I want to kiss every time she walks into a room. A woman I want to wake up next to. A woman I want to build something with that isn't just surviving, but actually living." Maggie's eyes burned. His eyes. "You can't know that. Not yet. It's only been a month." "I know I want to find out. I know I want more time with you to see if this feeling grows or fades. And I know—" James took her hands in his. "I know I'd rather risk being wrong about you than spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been if I'd been brave enough to try. And when you realize you were wrong, when you see me standing next to you at that festival and everyone's staring, and you suddenly understand what a mistake you've made, then I'll deal with it, but I don't think that's going to happen." "You can't be sure." "No," James agreed. "But I can be sure enough to try. Can you?" Maggie looked down at their joined hands, at his fingers wrapped around hers like they belonged there, at this connection between them that felt both fragile and impossibly strong. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "So am I." "What if I get hurt? What if you don't?" She looked up at him, at this man who'd been broken and was trying so hard to heal, and made a decision that was either the bravest or the stupidest thing she'd ever done. "All right," she said. "I'll wear the dress. I'll go to the festival. And we'll see what happens when you have to claim me in front of everyone you know." James pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Wait until after, when you see what choosing me actually costs." "It won't cost anything I'm not willing to pay." Maggie hoped he was right. But hope had betrayed her before, and she couldn't quite silence the voice in her head that said this was all going to end in heartbreak. The morning of the Harvest Festival, Maggie woke with her stomach in knots. She lay in bed, listening to the house wake around her, listening to James moving in his room, listening to Thomas starting to fuss, and tried to remember how to breathe. Today, she'd put on a dead woman's dress and walk into town on the arm of a man who claimed to want her, and everyone would see. Everyone would judge. Everyone would whisper about what James Bellamy was thinking choosing a woman like her. And probably James would hear those whispers and realize they were right. She almost didn't get up. Almost stayed in bed and told James she was sick. Told him to go without her. Told him this whole thing had been a mistake from the start. But then Thomas cried, and habit pulled her from bed before fear could root her there. She found James in the kitchen, trying to feed Thomas, and failing spectacularly. The baby had oatmeal in his hair on his face, and somehow on the ceiling. "I don't know how you make this look easy," James said, sounding defeated. Despite her fear, despite everything, Maggie smiled. "You have to actually get the food in his mouth, not just wave it in his general direction." "I was getting there." "Sure you were." She took the spoon from James and fed Thomas efficiently, wiping his face clean with practiced hands. "You should get ready. We need to leave soon if we want to get there before everything starts." "You're still coming." It wasn't a question, but it carried weight like one. "I said I would." "You can change your mind, if you're not ready, if you need more time." "James." Maggie set down the spoon and looked at him. "I'm never going to feel ready. There's never going to be a day when walking into that festival with you feels easy or safe or anything except terrifying. So we either do this now or we don't do it at all." James nodded slowly. "Then we do it now." He left to get ready, and Maggie finished feeding Thomas before carrying him to her room. The cream dress hung on the door waiting. She'd tried it on once 3 days ago, alone in her room with the door locked. It had fit perfectly. Mrs. Chen was as good as James had claimed. But fitting and wearing were different things. Fitting was private. Wearing was public. Wearing meant standing in front of people and saying, "Yes, I think I deserve beautiful things. I think I'm worth wanting." And Maggie had never been good at believing that. She dressed Thomas first, stalling. Then she stripped off her work dress and stood in her undergarments, staring at the cream fabric like it might bite her. "You're being ridiculous," she told herself. It's just a dress. But it wasn't just a dress. It was a declaration. It was hope made visible. It was everything she'd never let herself want wrapped up in cream-colored fabric. She put it on. The dress slid over her body like water settling into place with a rightness that made her throat tight. She buttoned it with shaking fingers, adjusted the waist, smoothed the skirt. Then she looked in the small mirror on her wall. The woman looking back at her wasn't beautiful, would never be beautiful by anyone's standards except maybe her own. But she looked alive, present, real, like someone who took up space and meant it. Maggie touched her reflection, half expecting it to shatter. A knock on her door. "Maggie? You ready?" "Almost." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Give me a minute." She pinned up her hair as best she could, splashed water on her face, and picked up Thomas. The baby grabbed a handful of her dress and cooed, which she chose to take as approval. When she opened the door, James was waiting in the hallway. He'd shaved, dressed in clothes she'd never seen him wear, a clean shirt vest coat that actually fit him instead of hanging loose. His hair was combed back and he looked like the man he must have been before grief hollowed him out. He stared at her. Maggie's stomach dropped. Here it was, the moment he realized what a mistake he'd made. "Say something," she said. "You're wearing it. You asked me to wear it." "I know. James shook his head, something like wonder crossing his face. "I didn't expect you look—" "Don't." Maggie cut him off. "Don't lie to make me feel better. I know what I look like." "Do you—" James moved closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "Because I don't think you do. I think you look in the mirror and see every cruel thing anyone's ever said about you. Every judgment, every rejection. But that's not what I see." "What do you see?" James reached out and touched her cheek, the same gentle touch that had started all of this. "I see a woman brave enough to wear a dress she doesn't believe she deserves. I see someone beautiful because she's alive and strong and here. I see—" His voice roughened. "I see the woman I want to walk into that festival with. The woman I want everyone to see on my arm. The woman I'm choosing." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "You better mean that." "I do. Because if we walk in there together and you change your mind, if you see people's faces and realize they're right about me, they're not right about you, and I won't change my mind." James took her free hand. "But if you need me to prove it, if you need me to say it in front of the whole town, then that's what I'll do. I'll stand up in front of everyone and tell them I'm courting Maggie Doyle, and I don't give a damn what they think about it. That's not how courting works. Then we'll make our own rules." James lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, and Maggie felt that kiss down to her toes. "Come on, let's go show Carter's Hollow what choosing each other looks like." They rode to town in the wagon, Thomas between them in his basket, the afternoon sun warm on Maggie's shoulders. James drove with one hand, the other resting on the seat beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence like a physical thing. The festival was already in full swing when they arrived. Music drifted from the town square, fiddles and guitars and voices raised in laughter. Tables groaned under food, children ran between adults' legs, and everywhere Maggie looked people were celebrating. James helped her down from the wagon, his hands steady on her waist. "Ready?" "No." "Me neither. Let's do it anyway." They walked into the square together, Thomas in Maggie's arms, James's hand on the small of her back. The music didn't stop. The world didn't end. But conversations faltered, and heads turned, and Maggie felt every eye in Carter's Hollow land on her like a physical weight. She almost turned and ran. Then James's hand pressed more firmly against her back, grounding her, reminding her she wasn't alone. "Bellamy!" A man called out, the mayor, from the expensive look of his suit. "Good to see you out. Been too long." "Mayor Harris," James nodded. "I'd like you to meet Miss Maggie Doyle. My—" He paused, and Maggie's heart stopped. The woman I'm courting. The mayor's eyebrows shot up. Around them, whispers started like wildfire. Is that so? The mayor looked at Maggie, his expression carefully neutral. Well, welcome to Carter's Hollow, Miss Doyle. Thank you, Maggie managed. They moved deeper into the festival, and everywhere they went the same thing happened. Stares, whispers, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Women looking her up and down with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Men looking at James like he'd lost his mind. And through it all, James kept his hand on her back, kept introducing her, kept making it clear to everyone watching that this wasn't temporary, wasn't shameful, wasn't something he was trying to hide. Dance with me, he said suddenly. James, I can't. Yes, you can. Give Thomas to Mrs. Chen. She's been trying to get her hands on him since we got here. And dance with me. I don't know how. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. Before Maggie could protest more, James was leading her toward where couples danced in the square. Mrs. Chen appeared and took Thomas with a smile that seemed genuine, cooing at the baby, in a language Maggie didn't understand. Then James pulled her into his arms, and the world narrowed to just the two of them. He held her close, closer than was probably proper, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. They swayed more than danced, neither of them knowing the steps, both of them just trying to stay upright and together. Everyone's staring, Maggie whispered. Let them. They're talking about us, about how strange we look together, about what you're thinking choosing someone like me. I'm thinking I'm the luckiest man in Carter's Hollow. James pulled her closer. I'm thinking I get to hold someone who's real and alive and brave enough to show up even when she's terrified. I'm thinking... He leaned down so his lips brushed her ear. I'm thinking I might be falling in love with you, Maggie Doyle. Maggie stumbled. James caught her, held her steady. Don't say that, she breathed. Why not? Because you don't mean it. Because you can't mean it. Because you're still waiting for me to realize I made a mistake. James pulled back just enough to look at her. I know what I feel. And I know it's fast. I know it's too soon by any normal measure. But I also know that when I'm with you, I remember what living feels like instead of just surviving. And that's worth more to me than taking things slow. Around them, people danced and whispered and judged. But in that moment, Maggie didn't care about any of them. She only cared about the man holding her, the man who'd somehow seen past everything she'd been taught to hide and decided she was worth wanting anyway. I might be falling in love with you too, she whispered. And it terrifies me. James smiled a real smile, full and genuine and beautiful. Good. We can be terrified together. He spun her, then clumsy and graceless, and Maggie laughed despite herself. Laughed despite the stares, despite the whispers, despite every voice in her head, telling her this couldn't last. Because in that moment, with James holding her, and Thomas safe with Mrs. Chen, and the sun setting over Wyoming, Maggie let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to have this, that maybe she was allowed to be chosen, that maybe for once in her life, staying would mean more than just surviving. It would mean living. They stayed at the festival until the stars came out, and Thomas started fussing in earnest. Maggie retrieved him from Mrs. Chen, who'd been passing him around to other women, like a cherished doll, and James helped her back into the wagon. Her feet ached from dancing, her cheeks hurt from smiling, and her heart felt dangerously full. The ride home was quiet. Not uncomfortable, just full. Like they'd both said everything that needed saying, and now existed in the space after words where only presence mattered. James carried a sleeping Thomas inside, while Maggie lit the lamps. The house felt different somehow, warmer, like it had been waiting for them to come back and breathe life into it again. I'll put him down, James said softly. You should rest. It's been a long day. A good day, though. James paused at the foot of the stairs, looking back at her. Yeah, a really good day. He disappeared upstairs, and Maggie stood in the kitchen, still wearing the cream dress, feeling like something fundamental had shifted. Like she'd walked into town as one person and come back as another, someone braver, someone more solid, someone who'd been chosen in front of witnesses. She changed into her nightgown eventually, carefully hanging the dress where she could see it. Then she lay in bed too, wired to sleep, listening to James move around upstairs, listening to the house settle, listening to her own heartbeat, counting out the rhythm of hope and terror in equal measure. Sleep came late, and thin, full of dreams about dancing and falling, and hands that held on. She woke to gray dawn light and the smell of coffee. Maggie sat up confused. She always made the coffee, always woke first, always started the day before anyone else stirred. She pulled on her robe and padded barefoot to the kitchen. James stood at the stove pouring coffee into 2 cups with the careful concentration of a man who'd practiced this. Thomas sat in his basket on the table awake and content, watching his father with serious eyes. And beside one of the coffee cups, Maggie's cup, the one with the chip on the handle that she always used, sat a plain gold ring. Maggie stopped in the doorway, her heart stuttering. James turned, saw her, and his face did something complicated. "Morning." "What?" Maggie's voice came out strangled. "What is that?" "A ring." "I can see that. Why is it on the table?" James set down the coffee pot and moved toward her, but not too close, giving her space, giving her room to run if she needed to. "I didn't sleep much last night," he said. "Kept thinking about yesterday, about watching you walk into that festival wearing that dress, about dancing with you while everyone stared, about the way you laughed when I stepped on your feet for the 3rd time." "James, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "I kept thinking about what you said, about how you're terrified, about how you're waiting for me to realize I made a mistake, and I kept trying to figure out what I could do, what I could say that would make you believe this is real." "So you what? You're proposing, just like that after one festival?" "No, not exactly." James ran a hand through his hair. "That ring was my grandmother's. My father gave it to my mother. It's been in a drawer since Sarah died because she had her own ring, one she picked out herself. But last night I dug it out and I cleaned it up and I—" He stopped, his throat working. "I put it on the table this morning because I needed you to see it, to see that I'm serious, that this isn't just gratitude or loneliness or whatever you think it is. But you're not proposing. Not yet. Not today." James moved closer, close enough that Maggie could see the circles under his eyes, the exhaustion that came from a night spent wrestling with hope and fear. "But I'm going to. Maybe not next week, maybe not next month, but soon. And I needed you to know that. Needed you to see that ring every morning and remember that I'm working towards something. That we're working towards something." Maggie's hands shook. She crossed her arms, trying to hold herself together. "What if I say no? Then you say no, and I'll be hurt. And I'll probably make a fool of myself trying to change your mind, but I'll respect it. I'll stay your employer if that's what you want. His voice cracked. "I'll figure out how to be around you without wanting more." "What if I say yes?" James's eyes snapped to hers. Are you saying yes?" "I'm asking what happens if I do. What changes? What you expect?" "Everything changes, and nothing changes." James closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "You'd be my wife, my partner, Thomas's mother in every way that matters. You'd have my name, my protection, my whole heart broken as it is. But you'd still be you. Still strong, still taking up space. Still the woman who kicked down my door and refused to let me drown. And you'd still be you, still grieving, still learning how to be a father, still—" Maggie's throat tightened. "Still the man who loved his wife enough to be destroyed by losing her. I did love Sarah. I'll always love her. But loving her doesn't mean I can't love you too. Different. Bigger maybe because I know what loss costs now. I know what it means to choose someone." James squeezed her hands. "You're not replacing her. You're not a substitute or a consolation prize. You're the woman I choose. Present tense. Active voice. Me choosing you because you're you. Maggie looked down at their joined hands, at the calluses they shared, the scars, the evidence of lives spent working. Then she looked at the ring sitting beside her coffee cup, catching the early light. I need time, she said finally. I need to believe this is real. That you won't wake up one day and realize you made a terrible mistake. That I'm worth... She stopped, unable to finish. Worth marrying. Worth loving. Worth building a life with. James lifted her hands to his chest, pressed them flat over his heart. You're worth all of that and more. But I'll give you time. As much as you need. The ring'll be there every morning. Waiting. No pressure. No ultimatum. Just a reminder that I'm working towards something. That I see a future with you in it. What if the future doesn't work out the way you think? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Figuring things out together when everything goes wrong. Despite everything, Maggie smiled. That's a terrible sales pitch. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to be honest. James's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I'm going to mess this up sometimes. I'm going to say the wrong thing or do something stupid or forget that you need reassurance because I'm so used to you being the strong one. But I'll keep showing up. I'll keep trying. And eventually, hopefully, you'll believe me when I say I want you. I want to believe you. That's a start. James pulled her closer until her forehead rested against his chest and his arms wrapped around her. That's enough for now. They stood like that in the kitchen while the sun rose and Thomas made small contented sounds and the coffee went lukewarm in its cups. And Maggie let herself be held, let herself believe for just a moment that maybe this man meant what he said, that maybe she was allowed to want the future he was offering. The ring stayed on the table. Every morning Maggie found it there beside her coffee cup. Every morning she looked at it and felt hope and terror war in her chest. And every morning James said nothing about it, just met her eyes over breakfast and let her see that he was still there, still choosing her, still waiting. The days settled into a new rhythm. James took over more of Thomas's care, giving Maggie time to breathe, to think, to exist without being constantly needed. He asked her opinion on ranch matters, included her in decisions, treated her like a partner instead of hired help. And he touched her more now with a confidence that came from her not pulling away. His hand on her shoulder when he passed behind her, his fingers grazing hers when they both reached for Thomas, his lips brushing her forehead when she looked tired. Small touches, building touches. Touches that said, I'm here. I'm not leaving. I'm choosing you every day. And slowly, painfully, Maggie started to believe him. 3 weeks after the festival, a letter came. Dutch brought it in with the other mail, dropped it on the table, and left before Maggie could ask who it was from. She picked it up, saw her name written in unfamiliar script, and almost threw it in the fire. Letters never brought good news. Not for women like her. But curiosity won, and she opened it. Inside was a single page written in the cramped hand of someone unused to writing. Miss Doyle. You don't know me, but I was at the Harvest Festival. I saw you dancing with Mr. Bellamy. I saw the way he looked at you, the way he held you like you mattered. I'm writing because I need you to know something. I'm fat too, have been my whole life, and I've spent that whole life believing I wasn't worth wanting, that I should be grateful for scraps, that I should make myself small and quiet and convenient because that's what women like us do. But watching you walk into that festival wearing that beautiful dress, watching you dance and laugh and take up space like you had every right to be there, it changed something in me. Made me think maybe I've been wrong. Maybe we've all been wrong about what we're worth. I don't know if you'll marry Mr. Bellamy. I don't know if this will work out the way you hope. But I needed to tell you that watching you be brave gave me permission to be brave too. Thank you for that. Mary Fisher. Maggie read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking. She'd never considered that her choice to show up to be seen, to let herself be wanted, might matter to anyone except her and James. She'd never thought about the other women watching, the other women who'd spent their lives being told they weren't enough. She folded the letter carefully and put it in her pocket. That night, after Thomas was asleep and the dishes were done, Maggie found James in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. He looked up when she entered, his face softening into a smile. "Everything all right? I got a letter today." "Oh. From a woman named Mary Fisher. She was at the festival." Maggie moved closer, her boots quiet on the straw-covered floor. "She's fat. Like me. And she said, watching me be brave gave her permission to be brave too." James set down the brush he'd been using. That's good, isn't it?" "I don't know. Maybe. It's just—" Maggie struggled to find words. "I never thought about it like that. About how choosing to show up, choosing to let myself be wanted might matter to someone else, might give someone else hope." "You give a lot of people hope, Maggie. You gave me hope when I'd given up completely. That's different. That was about Thomas. About keeping him alive." "No." James moved toward her. "It was about you refusing to let me disappear. About you showing up every day and taking up space and being so completely stubbornly alive that I couldn't help but remember what living felt like." Maggie looked up at him, at this man who'd been broken and was still learning how to be whole. "I'm scared." "I know. Not of you, not anymore. But of believing this is real and then losing it. Of letting myself be happy and then having it taken away. That's always the risk." James cupped her face in his hands. "Love always comes with the risk of loss. But the alternative is what never loving anyone, never letting yourself be happy because you're afraid it won't last. It feels safer." "It's not safer. It's just lonelier." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "And I'm done with lonely. I'm done with safe. I want messy and complicated and real. I want you, Maggie. Every stubborn, scared, brave piece of you. Even the pieces that don't believe I deserve you. Especially those pieces, because they're the ones that'll keep me honest, keep me showing up, keep me proving I mean what I say." Maggie closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "Ask me. Ask you what? You know what." James went still. "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm sure enough. I'm sure I'd rather risk being wrong about this than spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been." James dropped his hands from her face, and for one terrible moment, Maggie thought she'd miscalculated. Then he took both her hands in his and dropped to one knee in the straw, and her heart stopped. "Maggie Doyle," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're the strongest, bravest, most stubbornly alive person I've ever met. You saved my son. You saved me. You made this house feel like a home again instead of a tomb. And I—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I love you. Not because you're convenient. Not because I'm grateful. Not because I'm lonely. But because you're you, and you're exactly what I want. What I choose. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving you're worth wanting?" Maggie looked down at this broken man on his knees in the straw, offering her everything he had. Looked at the hope and fear in his eyes that matched her own. Looked at the future he was trying to build, and the past he was trying to heal from. And she made a choice. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." James surged to his feet and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him like she was something precious he was afraid of losing. He kissed her hard and deep, pouring everything he felt into that kiss, love and gratitude and relief and promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm going to mess this up sometimes," he said. "I know. I'm going to need reminding that you're real. That this is real. I know that too. And I'm probably going to love you so much it scares me." Maggie smiled against his lips. "Good. We can be scared together." They stood in the barn holding each other while the mare shifted in her stall, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. And Maggie let herself believe, really believe that maybe she was allowed to have this. That maybe being wanted wasn't a temporary thing, or a mistake waiting to happen. That maybe for once love could be something that grew instead of something that died. They married 3 weeks later in the parlor of the ranch house with only Dutch Pete and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. Thomas fussed through the ceremony, and Maggie wore the cream dress again because James asked her to, and nothing went perfectly. But it was real. It was theirs. And when James slipped his grandmother's ring onto her finger and kissed her in front of God and 3 people who'd learned to care about them, Maggie felt something inside her that had been locked shut for years finally crack open. Not just hope, not just love, but the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that she was allowed to take up space, allowed to be wanted, allowed to build a life that was about more than just surviving. The winter that followed was hard. Money was tight, supplies ran low, and there were days when Maggie wondered if they'd make it to spring. But James worked the ranch with renewed purpose, and Maggie kept the house running, and together they figured out how to be partners, instead of just 2 people occupying the same space. Thomas grew fat and happy, learning to laugh, to reach for things, to recognize his mother and father as the people who showed up every time he needed them. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, the Bellamy Ranch came back to life. Dutch warmed to Maggie after she set Riley's broken arm when he came back begging for work, and she made James give him a second chance. Pete taught her to ride patient through all her fumbling, treating her like she'd always belonged. And Mrs. Chen brought other women from town. Women like Mary Fisher. Women who'd spent their lives being told they weren't enough, and Maggie fed them and listened to them and showed them by existing that maybe they'd been wrong about what they deserved. Spring came eventually, melting the snow, turning the prairie green. And on a morning when the sun felt warm for the first time in months, Maggie woke to find James already up. Thomas in his arms, standing at the window, watching the light break over the horizon. She joined them, sliding under James's free arm, and together they watched the day begin. "I've been thinking," James said quietly. "Dangerous." He smiled. "I've been thinking about that first day, when you kicked down my door and saved Thomas. When you told me no one wanted a fat girl but you could nurse the baby." "I remember. I should have said it then. Should have told you right then that I wanted you. That having you here, having you be you, was the best thing that could have happened to us." Maggie leaned into his warmth. "You weren't ready to say it then." "No, but I'm ready now." James looked down at her, and the love in his eyes was so clear, so steady, that it didn't even scare her anymore. "I want you, Maggie Bellamy. Want you in my house, in my bed, in my life. Want you taking up space and singing in Gaelic and making bread that smells like memory. Want you exactly as you are for as long as you'll have me." "That's a long time." "Good." Thomas reached for Maggie, and she took him, settling him on her hip where he belonged. He was getting heavy, growing fast, becoming the person he was meant to be, because 2 people had refused to let him die. "I want you too," Maggie said. "Want you broken and healing and learning how to be a father. Want you showing up every morning even when it's hard. Want you looking at me like I matter, like I'm worth fighting for, like choosing me was the easiest decision you ever made." "It was," James said. "Easiest and best." They stood together in the morning light, a widower who'd learned to love again, a woman who'd learned she was worth loving, and a baby who'd survived because they both refused to quit. 3 people who'd almost been destroyed by loss and grief and the world's cruel judgments, but who'd found each other anyway. Found each other and built something real. Something that lasted, something worth staying for. And years later, when people asked Maggie how she'd ended up married to James Bellamy, she'd smile and tell them the truth. "I showed up, I stayed, and he chose me anyway." Not because she was beautiful, not because she was small or delicate or any of the things the world said women should be, but because she was strong enough to kick down doors, brave enough to fight death with her bare hands, and stubborn enough to believe that taking up space wasn't something to apologize for. She was Maggie Doyle Bellamy, the cook who stayed the woman who was wanted, the mother who sang in Gaelic while rocking a baby, who'd lived because she refused to let him die. And she'd never been more beautiful than when she'd finally learned she didn't need to be. Because love, real love, the kind that lasted, wasn't about deserving or earning or shrinking yourself down to fit someone else's expectations. It was about showing up, about staying, about being brave enough to take up space and trust that the right person would see you and choose you anyway. James had chosen her, and she'd chosen him right back. And in the end, that choice, that terrifying, exhilarating, life-changing choice, was all that mattered.